Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're going to be making old-fashioned peanut butter cookies. Now these are those peanut butter cookies like your grandma used to make. They're the really thick, rich, chewy, soft, old-fashioned peanut butter cookies. And they have pretty basic ingredients. You want a stick of butter, which is half a cup of butter, 1 egg, have a teaspoon of vanilla, and you can leave that out or put it in, but I really like the way the vanilla accents the other flavors in just about anything I bake, but especially in cookies. Now, I'm using a cup and a half of all-purpose flour. If you are using self-rising, you're not going to need this stuff over here. You might want to put just a tiny little bit of baking powder in it if you want them really thick, but I also have a half teaspoon of baking powder, just a little bit of salt, less than a quarter teaspoon, and I've got about half a teaspoon of baking soda. To sweeten these, I have half a cup of regular sugar and a half cup of brown sugar, and I've got 3/4 of a cup of peanut butter. Now you can use self-rising flour if that's all you've got, but the all-purpose, you're going to want to add some leavening to it, and I'm going to go ahead and dump in the baking powder and the salt and the baking soda into my flour and kind of whisk that up a little bit. You can also sift this if you want to. Your grandma was right. Anytime you sift your flour, it makes your baked products a little lighter. I usually do it the lazy way and just use a fork or a whisk or something and put a little air into it. But what we want to start with is our butter. And we're going to put our butter in our mixer, and we're going to beat that butter until it's really whipped. And that's going to make our cookies much lighter. You can mix them by hand or use a hand mixer, but like I said, you really want to beat this butter good. And when you do that, you're going to see exactly what we got here. It's going to stick all to the sides of the bowl. So I'm going to scrape my bowl and do this one more time with just the butter. And then I'm going to add my sugar to the bowl and really cream the butter and the sugar together. That'll get it creamed even better, but you do want to start, even though it mostly sticks to the side of the bowl, with the butter. If you were using a hand mixer, you might be able to get it a little bit better. If you did a double batch so that you had more butter, it would definitely whip up a little bit better. But because I only have that half a cup in there, it's not whipping real well on its own. It mostly sticks to the sides of my mixer. And this is a half a cup of packed brown sugar. Brown sugar in cookies, it makes the cookies softer and chewier. And you can cut your white sugar and add more brown sugar if you want. You could even do all brown sugar and have a really chewy cookie. Okay. I'm going to scrape my bowl again because a lot of my butter is still sticking in the bottom of the bowl, and I really want to cream that good. Because that's the difference in an okay peanut butter cookie and a really good peanut butter cookie. Okay, I got it pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my peanut butter, and I'm going to cream the peanut butter in with the sugar and the butter. I'm going to scrape the bowl one more time and cream it again just a little bit. And you can make these with crunchy peanut butter or creamy peanut butter. It's just whichever one you prefer. If you don't want the nuts in your cookies, use creamy, or if you want a little chunk in your cookie, go ahead and use crunchy peanut butter. Okay, I'm going to hit this one more time. Alright, now I'm going to add my vanilla and my egg. And I'm going to kind of scrape the sides of the bowl down so that all that gets mixed in together. Okay, now we get to add our flour mixture. Now when you're baking at home, brands do kind of matter because there are some brands of flour that are much better than others. I usually get unbleached flour whenever I'm baking anything because unbleached is just much healthier for you. But I like Pillsbury, I like King Arthur, and I like White Lily. I have used other brands that they're not ground soft enough to really be good in baking. Some of them are so coarse that your cookies just won't come out. So it does kind of matter what brand you choose when you're baking at home. Those 3 brands I know are good. I've never had a problem with them ever being too coarse or my baked goods not coming out. I'm going to add this all at once. And I'm going to use my spatula and scrape the sides and just kind of fold this in so that, and I'm going to hit it with my mixer again to mix it good. But if you just put your mixer down in there and you hit that flour, it's going to blow it all over your kitchen. And that's never good. Also, some of the brands of peanut butter can be a little bit gritty, some of the off brands. So you might want to be careful with those. If you have a store brand or something that you really like, though, it should be fine. But the ones that are super dense and a little gritty, they're not good in this recipe. And our dough is pretty well mixed up. And this dough is not going to be super sticky. It's going to be pretty easy to handle when you get it out of here. Now at this point, you can take your spatula and you can clean this out. And you can put this all, wrap it up in some saran wrap or wax paper and put it in the refrigerator because you do want to refrigerate it. Or you can go ahead and take your cookie scooper while it's cool, or if you don't have a cookie scooper, you can just use spoons and go ahead and form it into cookies before you put it in the refrigerator, because right now it's soft and it's going to be easy to handle with a cookie scooper. Once you put it in the refrigerator and it firms up, you're really going to have to use some force to get it out of there. And I know a lot of people have commented that they have trouble with arthritis, and I do too, so I understand that. So if you use your cookie scooper now, it will be much easier on your hands. And you just scoop the cookies out. And you can keep these, if you wrap this up good and tight, put it down in a Ziploc bag or even just in the wax paper, wrap it up real tight. You can keep these in the fridge for a couple of weeks and just take them out as you want them and bake them so that you have fresh baked cookies for a couple of weeks without the mess. You know, like that refrigerator cookie dough that you buy. And this recipe will make about 2 dozen cookies. Of course, it kind of depends on the size you're making them. You want to put this in the fridge for at least an hour. 2 or 3 hours is even better so that it gets good and stiff and it doesn't flatten out a lot when you bake it. Also, that time in the fridge kind of lets the dough rest, and it just rises better, and the texture of the cookies is better if you let your cookie dough rest before you bake it. if you've ever used a cookie scooper to scoop out cold dough, you know how difficult that is, and it can be really hard to squeeze the scooper. This is much, much easier. So whether you have arthritis or not, I really recommend forming the cookies before you put your dough in the refrigerator. Okay, this made like 28 cookies, so I got a couple extra ones out of this batch. Okay, so now, like I said, you want to wrap this up and you want to put it in the refrigerator for at least an hour. You can do it overnight, or you can leave it up to a couple weeks. When you take your cookies out of the refrigerator, they're going to look like this. They're just going to be little balls, and they're going to be very firm, much firmer than when they went in the refrigerator. That's why I said it's a good idea to go ahead and scoop them before you put them in there. And you're just going to space these out on the pan. They're not going to spread out a whole lot when they bake, so you don't need like a ton of room between them, but you do want to space them out a little bit. You can get about a dozen on a cookie sheet together. And once you get them on your cookie sheet, you're going to use a fork to make that crisscross pattern that we all remember in Grandma's peanut butter cookies. You want to mash the cookies down some, but you don't want to mash them flat. And when you do this, you don't want to just mash and then pick your fork up. You want to mash down and then slide your fork, and you do want to kind of hold the edges to keep it from breaking apart like that one just did. But if you just mash down and then pick your fork up, what's going to happen is all the top of the cookie is going to come off on the fork like that. If you have trouble with your fork sticking in this, which you shouldn't if you refrigerate them, because the dough wasn't super sticky even before I put it in the refrigerator. And as long as you slide it, it'll come out just fine. But if you have trouble with that, you can dip your fork in just a little bit of granulated white sugar, and that will help keep it from sticking. If you want a little bit of a variation on your cookies, you can also roll your cookies before you do the cross pattern in them in a little bit of granulated sugar, and it'll give you a little bit of a texture on the outside of the cookie. The size and the shape of your cookies is not going to change a whole lot once you put them in the oven. So how thick you want them is going to be determined by right now. When you mash them out, they're going to come out about this thick. They will be a little bit bigger around, but not a whole lot. If you want a thinner cookie, you're going to want to mash them out more before you put them in the oven. And you're going to bake these in anywhere between a 300 and a 350 degree oven. A cooler temperature when you're baking them will give you a slightly chewer cookie. I usually do mine in a 350 degree oven for about 10 to 12 minutes. How thick they are is going to determine partly how long they bake, also the type of oven. So yours could bake as little as 8 minutes, especially if you have a convection oven, or if you make them thinner, it's not going to take as long to bake them. But if you want them really, really chewy, turn the oven down to 300 and bake them a little bit longer. So let's put these in the oven. Okay, our cookies are done now, and they do spread out a little bit, but like I said, not much, and they are still as thick as they were when I mashed them out with the fork. Now you don't want to take them off your cookie sheet immediately, because if you do, that'll cause them to fall. You remember when you were a kid and you went running through the kitchen and you ran out if there was cake in the oven because they said the jarring would make it fall. Well, the same thing is true with cookies. When you take your hot cookies out of the oven, you want to sit them down carefully on the counter, not slam them, and let them sit there for a couple of minutes before you take them off and move them to a rack or something to cool. And if you line your pan with parchment paper, you can really let them cool on the pan and they'll be fine. You don't have to move them off to a rack. But if you do move them off to a rack, like I said, you want to give them a couple of minutes to sit there. If you move them right away, they'll fall and they'll get really flat. So if you've had that problem with any homemade cookie, chocolate chip, or oatmeal, or whatever, you need to let them sit for just a minute or two before you move them off the pan. You can see they're just a little bit brown on the bottom, and there you can see they're about as thick as when I mashed them out with a fork, and they spread out just a little bit. But these will be soft and tender, and they will bring back so many memories of Grandma's kitchen, and just the smell of them in here, it kind of brings back childhood memories. And these are the traditional version. I know there are a lot of more modern versions out there, but these are the ones that you had when you were a kid. This is a pretty simple recipe. There are a few tricks to get them to come out right, but I hope you give these a try and remember some of those times when you were a kid and you went by Grandma's house and she had these cookies coming out of the oven hot and fresh. Thank you so much for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. If you haven't already, please click like and subscribe before you leave. And until next time, remember to put God first.